Joining us right now via Zoom chat is Pavel Stroilov. He is an exile from Putin's Russia, having fled the UK after his research as a historian and put his life at danger. And he studied law at King's College in London, University of Law. He now works as a legal consultant for Christian Legal Center or Christian Concern in the UK. Good morning to you, Pavel Stroilov.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Praise be to Jesus. We're glad that you are here, sir. Let me just start with, give us a little bit of background really quick before we jump in. Why did you leave Russia? What documents did you bring with you that you eventually published?
Yes, well, I was involved as a student really in Russia. I was involved in history research, and that was mainly history of the Cold War. Because most of the Soviet archives, which were secret in Soviet times, remained secret in post-Soviet times as well. That was rather dangerous, and especially since I was lucky to access by incident, really, quite a collection of documents which were officially still top secret. Mainly these are documents to do with Soviet foreign policy in 1980s, a bit of 1970s, but mostly 1980s. This includes records of various international negotiations, notes taken at Politburo meetings, and various internal memos. So in order to be able to publish those, and of course, as you would expect, the documents do not correspond to the official Putin version of the history of the Cold War. Nor do they square very well with the mainstream Western version of the Cold War as it is. But obviously, since Putin's version is so different, and since the spy money and a wave of repression for publishing anything in the West already started in first Putin years, I had to run away in order to be able to try and publish these documents.
That's been one of the issues we've had, obviously, trying to cover the special military operation in Ukraine, is knowing fact from fiction, trying to sort out what to believe. And I think we kind of all come to the conclusion that we don't really trust the actors in charge in the Ukraine, and we don't really trust the actors in charge in Russia. We stand with the people, but we don't know what to believe and what not to believe most times. So let me ask you, what is your take on Vladimir Putin's special military operation in the Ukraine?
Well, as I was growing up in Moscow in 1990s, and then spent there some years as a young man in early Putin years. It was pretty. Basically, the root of this is that the dismantling of the communist regime was unfinished. Basically, we all, Russians and the West, relaxed too quickly. Basically saying, well, the Soviet regime is dead. Whereas in reality, as we now know with hindsight, it only faked its own death. Whereas some of the bloodiest elements of his power structure, most notably the KGB, were not dismantled. They remained there, and they were having these revanchist ideas about the Cold War being lost only because Gorbachev was a traitor. We shouldn't have lost. Something pretty similar to what Germany had between the two world wars. So starting from early 90s, really, the KGB forces, the so-called siloviki, like the power ministries, power forces, started doing what they could to restore the Soviet regime and to restore the Soviet empire. First, the first target was Chechnya, because they thought it's a small country, there won't be too much resistance. They miscalculated there. It ended in 10 years of a very bloody war and genocide, frankly. But once that was over, soon they followed with Georgia. Then they annexed Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. And they hoped that Ukraine would collapse. It didn't. And now the next step is to invade Ukraine and take it over anyway. So this is, basically this is their march to restore the Soviet empire as it was in the times of the Cold War. And of course, if they've been in Ukraine, they won't stop there either.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, it certainly seems that the KGB was sort of rebranded as to something we know today. But it reminded me also of another famous detractor, Yuri Bezmenov. I mentioned him earlier in the hour. He was a famous KGB defector, and he once said that the main objectives of the KGB was to do something called active measures, in which they would ideologically subvert the populace of a country to the extent that the people could no longer discern reality. Do you see that as something that has been accomplished here in the Western world, and why we're being emotionally manipulated into taking sides in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, in a way, obviously, that's absolutely true. Well, KGB the idea of active measures is central to all KGB activities, and that is how they fought the Cold War. That's all they can do. So it's not an intelligence service whose main task is just to steal secrets. Mm-hmm. The task of the KGB is to influence, to manipulate, to build some sort of fifth column on enemy territory, and so on. That's how they see it. It all comes down historically to Marxist ideology, and where they thought that the whole idea was that there would be a proletarian communist revolution everywhere, and the Soviet Union is only there to help if something goes wrong. And that's why, for example, in Ukraine, they followed the same scheme, which absolutely is not suited to the circumstances. But they tried to stir up trouble in the most industrial parts of it, in coal-producing regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. They founded Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. Again, what does it mean? It comes straight from the old Soviet lexicon. And then when it didn't work, they are sort of correcting the errors of the calculated idea of the hybrid war, of their plan of hybrid war and revolution and popular uprising by simply a straight, brutal military invasion.
We're talking with Pavel Stroilov. We have just about a minute before we go to break, but let me ask you real quick. So are you suggesting that Vladimir Putin, does he want to bring back communism, or he just wants to bring back what felt like the USSR? Can you make a distinction? You got about 60 seconds.
I think the only thing they've dropped is the actual Marxist ideology, and they started to see it as a weakness towards the end of the Soviet Union, the beginning of post-Soviet times. Well, it clearly discredited itself. But apart from that, all these Soviet maxims like might is right, and we want to have a great empire, and Americans are enemies, and we are going to rule the world. Well, this sentiment is still there. That's their mentality.
So let me go back to Vladimir Putin. A KGB colonel somehow gets to be the leader of Russia for 20 years. It boggles my mind. I know he changed I guess it was the constitution or the laws that allowed him to stay in power, but in a democracy, for one man to be in charge for 20 years boggles my mind. How is that possible?
Well, it's not a democracy. That's the answer. He abolished democracy. You have the elections are more genuine in Iran nowadays than in Russia, and Iran is not much of a democracy. So he got rid of independent media. He got rid of disloyal big businesses and even really all businesses. He suppresses dissent brutally. Opposition rallies are being brutally suppressed. Basically, the moment you are on the street protesting, you may have only a few seconds until you are brutally arrested and taken to the police station. And of course, all the elections were rigged in a quite shameless way. So this way he stays in power.
So who's running Russia? Is it Vladimir, or is it the oligarchs, or is it the two of them working in union?
I think originally, probably Putin was basically just an agent of the KGB mafia, taking over the whole state power on their behalf. And then, well, as far as one can figure out, I think over time he became more of a personal dictator simply because he has been there for a long time, and has a lot of sycophants came around, and he's got a lot of megalomania and so on. So it is now probably a bit more dictatorial than it was in the beginning.
Mm.
Now, Patriarch Kirill also had his beginnings in the KGB. What is the relationship between Russia and the Orthodox Church? Is it more of a like a how would you say? I'm spacing on the word, but is it more like are they spokespeople for the government now, or is it's still independent as a church?
No, it's not independent, and of course the Putin's idea about Christianity is basically it's limited to the idea that to have a strong empire, one wants a strong church, which would be quite obedient to secular authorities, and it must be strictly disciplined so that you don't have something that we are having right now, where 200 priests suddenly sign a petition to stop the war in Ukraine. Well, basically, you need to have a power structure, and you need Patriarch Kirill to suppress this and to discipline these people. So in that sense, Russian Orthodox Church is unfortunately a tool of the state. It's a different matter that essentially they are playing. Putin and these secular rulers who are trying to manipulate the church. There is a sense in which they are playing with something that is stronger than they are. They probably don't believe that there is something real behind the church, and there is no harm in the church worshiping Jesus as long as you've got enough agents in high places. But we know that it works differently, and there are surprises for them in that, such as the conscientious clergymen protesting and risking their livelihoods and risking their freedom, despite all this strict discipline there.
Let's play, let me just play devil's advocate for you for a second. On the Ukraine side of this equation, we have seen corruption at a big scale. I mean, the Hunter Biden story alone was pretty shocking to us during the last couple of years. I mean, the amount of money, billions of dollars flowed in their biolabs now that are obviously, American sponsored. What are they doing there? Who knows? We don't know. So there's a lot of corruption in that regard. And then there's the story of Nazi brigades and all this other stuff. Couldn't it be possible that Vladimir Putin simply doesn't want this on his doorstep, and there are more, let's say, innocent motives than what we've discussed so far? What would you say to that, Pavel Stroilov?
Well, the simple answer is that, yes, there is corruption in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are quite fed up with it. They elected Zelensky because he was promising to get rid of it. But if Putin didn't want that on his doorstep, Russian corruption now completely eclipses Ukrainian corruption. So he would start at home. And the same goes for neo-Nazis. Well, I'm sure that Ukraine, like any European nation, has some minority of neo-Nazis, like everyone has that. I've seen a lot of them growing up in Moscow. That was part of Russian neo-Nazis. That was part of the city landscape. From what my friends tell me from Ukraine, you don't see that. But again, if Putin was so much opposed to that, he would probably start in Moscow. I think a more fundamental point is that, any country on earth can be criticized for a lot of things. There is no paradise on earth. When you have a total war of this nature, it's not about trading criticisms of how a particular country falls short of particular ideals. Rather, it is a clash of ideals. Ukraine's reality may have its shortfalls, but the Ukrainian ideal is as a democratic Western Christian nation, and they have an idealized view of the West. That's why they want to enter the European Union and this sort of thing. Whereas Putin's ideal is to restore the Soviet Union, and especially at this moment, as he was starting this war. If you listen to his speeches, if you read his speeches, it's astonishing how he just addresses his troops as comrades and talks about Ukraine having no right to exist because it was just an administrative unit of the USSR created by Lenin, and now the Soviet Empire is coming back to take what belongs to it. And that's what he wants.
Yeah, I was astonished by his use of the Great Revolution, speaking, using the term comrade. Is comrade a term that Russians use today in their average language?
No, they don't. But Putin, when he came to power, he restored this form of address in the armed forces. That was one of the first actions of Putin when he came to power in early 2000s.
Okay. Well, I was watching a lot of vloggers from Russia to try to get a sense of how they're doing in all this, because, like I said earlier, I don't trust the Ukrainian government and I don't trust the Russian government in this situation. But I'm trying to get the sense of the people, and in Russia, it seems like maybe you can correct me, but it seems like a lot of the Russians. I don't know how much of the Russians, but much of the Russians aren't in favor of this war in Ukraine, and they aren't really wanting USSR 2.0. What would you say to that?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of people are afraid, and a lot of people are indifferent and want just to get on with their lives. But you can't ignore the fact that since the beginning of this invasion, well, we know around 14,000 people by name who were arrested for protests on the streets of Russian cities. And these are only those who were arrested and whom you know by name. So probably the real figure would be in tens of thousands. And the leaks from the Kremlin circles, from what I've read, are that now the Putin's National Guard units, kind of his elite military unit, insist they must stay in Moscow to protect Putin from Russians,
wow,
rather than being sent to Ukraine, where obviously things are not going great for them. And of course, so that is, well, obviously you can argue, and you can play one blog against another blog, and you can point to official opinion polls to show there is support. But you've got tens of thousands of people who are prepared to risk arrest, possibly torture in the hands of Russian police, possibly imprisonment, definitely a criminal record, just to protest against that. That is something. Russia is not with him.
We only have just like 2 minutes left, and I want to ask some questions about getting to an understanding of where the Russians are at, sort of on a moral, ethical compass. So we only have a couple minutes, but how about mass attendance there, as far as the Orthodox go, or abortion rates? Have they gone up or down? Alcoholism, has it gone up or down since they become a democracy, so to speak?
Yes, well, Russia, under Putin, like under the Soviet Union, it has one of the most liberal abortion laws in the world. It's abortion on demand up to 12 weeks, if I remember correctly. For all his talk of Christian values and so on, for all this propaganda, the reality is quite different. And and of course the same. Well, you can't really say that in Russia, and especially in the higher echelons of Putin's power structure, you've got any shining examples of morality, and thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, a couple of obvious examples.
Well, and I also see, since I've never paid attention before, very Western as far as shopping and restaurants and life. It seems just very much like the rest of the West, and I think that they're fearing that these sanctions, these companies, are punishing them by shutting down instead of punishing Putin. But it seems like that's also a tragedy in this story. The people are being punished instead of Vladimir Putin. But
I think that is right, and the root of the problem is that the West doesn't have the courage to do what needs to be done, i.e., no-fly zone, or at least openly supply defense systems to Ukraine, do this sort of thing.
Well,
so instead of that,
we're out of time. I'm sorry, Pavel. I hate to cut you off, but I'm actually out of time. I have to say goodbye because we're going to be cut off. Pavel Stroilov, Christian Concern, Christian Legal Center in the UK. Thank you for your time today. God bless you and God love you.